An extremely dangerous situation is unfolding across the Midwest with multiple complexes of very powerful thunderstorms moving through. As I'm recording this around noon Central Time, we have widespread destructive storms moving through the Chicago area with winds up to 100 miles per hour. These are more than enough to not just be destructive, but to be damaging across the region, with tornado-like damage possible in its path. These storms will be racing to the southeast today. Many more will be in the path later. We're also tracking a flood threat that'll be setting up tonight. The Midwest is the center of all the action of storms over the next few days. Additionally, we'll be tracking the tropics, including Hawaii, where there is interest in some potential tropical impacts, and we'll end off tracking the heat with a new extreme heat wave setting up over the southeast. Today is Tuesday, August 11th. There's a lot happening in the weather world, but those destructive storms deserve our full attention, so without further ado, let's dive in. The biggest risk for today is definitely severe thunderstorms driven by that damaging wind threat. We have two complexes that are currently ongoing. As of this recording, about 10 a.m. Central, these will be moving through this enhanced risk, that orange risk, and bringing wide swaths of damaging winds. And today is definitely a day where we could have a moderate risk of severe weather in future updates. We have pretty high confidence that there'll be a swath of very impactful destructive winds possible within this corridor. So these aren't just regular storms that maybe bring a nuisance to your plans. These could be disruptive and destructive storms that could bring some damage, especially with damaging winds. We're watching for a lot of tree limb snapping, anything outside to get blown around. So those are our top concerns today. You can see it in this red, and especially in this hatched area, that's where significant damaging wind gusts are possible. And once again, I do think it's possible we get some higher probabilities somewhere in here, which could warrant a moderate risk, level 4 out of 5, which is pretty rare. Those aren't issued every day. The severe storms are significant. The flood threat, though, is also very significant. We don't want to overlook this. We have a 3 out of 4 moderate risk of flooding over portions of the Ohio Valley, a little bit further to the southeast than that main severe weather risk, but this does include Cincinnati, this does include Pikesville and Athens, Ohio. So if you're in these communities, make sure to not overlook the flood threat. Somewhere in this corridor could get 10 inches of rainfall, and that could be very impactful for your day. So watching out, but even in this broader slight risk, we still want to be on guard for some flood concerns, and you can see the marginal risk is a much broader, extends all the way back to the Dakotas. One of the things going for us is energy. We have so much energy in the atmosphere right now in the Cape Valleys, especially in these red and purple colors, right where the storms gobble it all up as they move to the southeast. So all this energy will be translated primarily to wind energy, and that's why we're very concerned about damaging wind thunderstorms in this region. So let's play out this model's prediction of the forecast. It's handling the current situation quite well, where we have these two distinct complexes. Keep in mind, this is a very mesoscale environment, so all these models are going to be wrong in their exact timing, their location, but we can at least get a peek as to some of the threats that we're dealing with. And notice Chicago, you really need to be watching out in the next hour or two, around noontime, 1 p.m. today. This is when some of these strong thunderstorms will be moving through, and in some of these purple bullseyes of reflectivity, that's definitely where some very damaging winds are possible. So these storms will be very strong. Our other complex will be moving toward West Virginia. It could be crossing out of Ohio over the next few hours. Still a damaging wind threat with this. As we go further, this complex moving through West Virginia, it will be weakening. So some slightly good news there, but this other complex, this is just a mess of very damaging winds. Also a flood potential. Notice how these storms are oriented from northwest to southeast. So we have training motion where all these heavy downpours will be slowly moving through the same areas, and when we get multiple downpours on end, it could quickly add up the rainfall total. So this is where our flood threat will really start picking up, but we still could have some nasty thunderstorms with some of these highlighted reflectivity bullseyes here. So these are some pretty high impact thunderstorms that will all be moving to the south. Again, keep in mind this model is not going to be perfect, but in general it looks like we'll have a complex moving through Ohio and then eventually into Kentucky and West Virginia as we get later on into the evening. Now the further in the evening we go, as this line pans out a little more, still looking at a pretty significant damaging wind risk, especially on the leading edge of this line. So that's where 70, even isolated 80 mile per hour wind gusts are possible. Notice though, a little bit further back, this is what I am also concerned about. We could get some overnight redevelopment of thunderstorms back in Indiana, back in portions of Ohio, and look how these storms just train and stall over the same area for hours on end overnight. If this happens like this model is showing, then this is very bad news for the flash flood situation. We already had that earlier complex moving through, and just add several hours of downpours overnight. This could quickly deteriorate into a dangerous overnight flood threat. This is something we'll be watching very closely across this region. Make sure when you're going to bed, even after the severe weather threat ends, you still have ways to get warnings for flood warnings, because rivers could rapidly rise. This could cause some pretty significant urban flooding as well in this area. The threat doesn't end today, it extends into the overnight. Now going tomorrow, we do expect some more storms, and this run of HRRR is spinning up some pretty powerful storms once again in these same areas in Chicago and moving through Indiana with more damaging winds and also more of a flood threat. If we get even more heavy rain here, this is not good for the flooding situation. Keep in mind, all the models are going to be inaccurate, at least to some degree. It's very tough tough to predict exactly where these complexes will form, but we'll keep a broad risk in general. Somewhere in this region we could get some more storms as we go into tomorrow, so that's another threat that we'll be watching, and you want to check back in for the forecast. Maybe some pretty powerful storms moving through Kentucky tomorrow evening. As we go into Thursday, even more storms will continue a little bit further to the west, so toward Minnesota, Iowa. These will be moving to the east back to the Midwest, which this would be day 3 of thunderstorms in a row if this does indeed happen. We're kind of stuck in the same weather pattern where you have big high pressure, big heat dome to the south, and all the storms are riding around the edge of it. And with this stuck pattern over the next few days, it'll just bring these multiple complexes through the same areas. Past today, details get really low, uncertainty becomes really high. It does look like though today won't be the only day of severe weather. We're in for a pretty active stretch up in the north. Real quickly, just highlighting some of that damaging wind potential. The ARRR's wind gusts in some of these storms, we can see up to 70 miles per hour on the leading edge as these move through the Chicago region and further to the southeast into Indiana. And we could definitely get some localized bullseyes of 80 plus mile per hour winds. So we are flirting with derecho territory here. That's definitely on the conversation. A derecho is just a long swath of damaging winds from a thunderstorm. These only happen a few times a year and they bring very widespread damaging wind impacts. We'll be watching the radar very closely, but regardless if we get a derecho or not, it's going to be a stormy, very disruptive day across the Midwest. Make sure you're ready for these storms when they come and you're paying attention to the weather so they don't catch you off guard. As mentioned, severe weather does continue past today into tomorrow and Thursday. So tomorrow we have a broad marginal risk and 2 bullseyes of slight risk. Now the Storm Prediction Center is saying there's so much uncertainty. We'll likely see a lot of changes. If we get a little more confidence, these slight risks will likely expand in coverage and we could even see an upgrade to another enhanced risk. So something we'll be watching closely. On Thursday, we also have another marginal risk of severe weather across a pretty broad corridor, but once again, once confidence increases, it's probably likely we'll see an upgrade to a slight risk for Thursday as well. Here is that rain threat we're tracking. There's going to be a corridor somewhere we can see in these orange and red colors where we get 6 inches plus of rain, and again, isolated bullseyes of up to 10 to 12 inches of rain is possible, especially if we do get some of those overnight training thunderstorms in this region. The flood threat is very serious. I really want to make sure we're emphasizing that and not only focusing on the severe weather, because this is a lot of rain, especially considering the soils are pretty saturated from previous rounds of rain that we've had. Alright, so that was an update on all of our severe thunderstorms, the flood risk. Now let's briefly turn to the tropics, because there is some stuff happening out in the Atlantic and the Pacific. In the Atlantic, we have 2 areas we're watching. There's a third area, this little tropical wave that we were also watching the past few days. This one no longer has any chance of development, so nothing to worry about there. This one up north of Bermuda, very unlikely to develop, only about 10%, and even if it does, it'll be a fish storm moving to sea. This one is a little more interesting, this tropical wave out in the middle of the Atlantic. It'll be moving to the northwest, and it could bring some impacts to the Lesser Antilles as we go into the end of the week, but still a lot of uncertainty with that. Now we're also tracking the Pacific, and we have 2 blobs, 2 areas that have decent chances of development, especially this red area. This has about a 90% chance of development, so we're pretty likely to see a tropical system from this over the next few days from this big disorganized cluster of storms. The problem is this will be moving to the northwest, and Hawaii could be in the impacts later on this week. So looking at the spaghetti models, here are the Hawaiian islands that I circled, and notice how many of them do take this track somewhere within the vicinity of the islands. Now there's a lot of uncertainty with how strong it'll be, where it'll track. The storm hasn't even formed yet, but if it does track through here, we could be talking about tropical impacts to the islands by this weekend. So this has the potential to be very significant, but we just don't know enough details right now to say anything with confidence. If you're in Hawaii though, make sure you're laser focused on the forecast because it definitely deserves your attention over the next few days. So we'll start with the Pacific, and this is the area of low pressure that could potentially be intensifying over the next few days. And the GFS model does spin up a pretty decent tropical system as it moves to the northwest. So we have pretty high confidence it will form, but once again the question is where does it go? Notice the GFS does make a pretty direct hit to the islands as it moves through later on this week, but this is just one solution, this is just one model run. Definitely don't take this as gospel, but it is important to be paying attention to the forecast because this is very well within the realm of possibility. Moseying on over to the Atlantic now to that other area of development. Here it is, this is the area of low pressure that some of our models are trying to close off into something. Notice even if it does form, the GFS in particular is pretty optimistic about it just kind of moving out to the open waters. and just dying off as nothing. But some of our other models keep it a little bit further south, maybe a little bit stronger to warrant watching. This one looks a lot less certain as to be bringing any impacts, but it is something we're watching, especially as we are heading toward the peak of tropical seasons. We'll have more updates in the next few days of this. Any impacts from the US, if there will be any at all, are very far off, and honestly most of our models are just spinning this out to sea. Alright, lastly I do want to talk about the heat, because the heat headlines will be picking up again by the end of the week into next week, and we're going to have a new heat wave that's really going to focus across the south. So the heat risk for the next few days is pretty expansive, but what I really want you to focus on is this purple color, because we're going to have a corridor of some very extreme heat risk, that purple color over the same areas day after day. So this is Friday, this is Saturday, we still have that extreme heat risk in this region, really along the Mississippi Valley and much of the southeast. Sunday, more heat risk. In fact, we could even have more of a concentrated level 4 out of 4 extreme risk. And even next Monday, still extreme risk over the same cities. So Memphis, Birmingham, Louisiana, you're kind of in the bullseye, but all across the southeast US, we're in for a very hot period, probably the hottest period of the whole year taking place this weekend into next week. Taking a look at what that looks like, these are the feels like temperatures, the heat plus the humidity, and we're talking about widespread heat indices above 100 degrees, some spots definitely above 110, and potentially for several days in a row. So this is a threat we're watching. We're also watching for warm overnight temperatures. That's another important consideration. If in the morning it only gets down to the 70s and 80s, it doesn't leave much time for your body to recover, and especially with a multi-day heat event, the heat stress can really compound after several days. Watching out further south, this will be pretty significant later on in the forecast with a new extreme heat wave setting up as we go into the middle of August. And that's all in the weather world. We're really concerned about that severe weather risk over the next few days. As I'm recording this, we have a tornado warning right in the middle of Chicago. Both of these complexes of thunderstorms are bringing very serious impacts. So if you're in the path, make sure we're preparing for potentially destructive storms and also potentially a significant flash flood threat that's undergoing tonight. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to get the latest updates on the weather world, consider subscribing. Otherwise, hope y'all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.